Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar about student loan forgiveness. I'm here with Jason DeLorenzo, and he is going to explain a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. I just wanted to give everyone a second to get logged in, but I'm going to introduce myself as well. My name is Peyton, and I am the Physician Engagement Coordinator here at Practice Match. I work with the career fair team and as well as the physician promoters team. And if some of you have attended the fair tonight, you already know me a little bit. So yeah, I'll give everyone a couple minutes to log on and then hand the screen over to Jason. Please note that during tonight's presentation, all microphones will be silenced, and there will be time for a Q&A after the webinar. So if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please put it in the chat box or the Q&A box and we'll get to those. So Jason, you can go ahead and take over whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks, Peyton. I'm going to share my screen here. Thank you all for having me speak today. I know you're on the tail end of a career fair, so lots of exciting things happening right now. We'll tie a bow around it by talking about a really fun topic, student loan debt. In actuality, there's a lot of good news out there for student loan borrowers, and we know that student loan borrowing for physicians specifically has increased exponentially over the past couple of decades, but there are great opportunities for savings. And that's really what we want to talk about with you here today, how the marketplace is evolving and what you can do to take advantage as you progress throughout early in your career as a physician. So we're going to talk about student loan cancellation, a program called Public Service Loan Forgiveness, which you may have heard of before. It's certainly been in the media a lot. And the CARES Act and how that impacted student loans and what's happening in January that you can prepare for. By quick way of background, I'm Jason DeLorenzo. Some of you may have heard me speak before. I founded an organization called Doctors Without Quarters that works maybe even with some of you today. And then more recently, an organization that works in a tech capacity way with employers and partners to help employers help you navigate the student loan marketplace. So in bridging all of these different moving parts together, really trying to provide seamless resources that ultimately end in you, the borrower, maximizing the savings that's available through all of these different evolving programs that exist today. I have since 2010 been lecturing around the nation, presenting at graduations at medical schools, and serving as a resource to billions of dollars of federal student loan debt. And what I've learned in the trenches helping borrowers is what I want to impart on you today as this marketplace, as we said, is evolving now. And in many ways, there are increased benefits available to you. So in terms of our agenda here, first thing we're going to talk about, I always like to do this out of the gate, is talk about terms that you should understand, and maybe certain terminology that's used in the student loan world doesn't meet the Webster's dictionary definition of these terms, but they're used in the student loan world. We want to make sure that we're all talking the same language. We'll cover briefly loan types and repayment options. Presumably, some of you are familiar, most of you are going to be familiar with some of your repayment options now. I want to put a microscope on the ones that make the most sense for early career doctors and how that's evolving now. So we're going to talk about the recent legislation mentioned, including public service loan forgiveness and loan cancellation. We'll go through a case study or even a couple of case studies here. And then we'll talk about action items and resources available to you. So if we jumped into now terms to understand, these are the core concepts that we want to cover here. First is it's helpful to understand who your lender is versus who your servicer is, because sometimes it's the same organization. Today, it's typically not. Your lender for all your federal student loans, and this has been true since July of 2010, is the U.S. Department of Education. Those are called direct federal student loans, and they're serviced by one of a handful of organizations. MOHELA is an increasingly frequent servicer that you might see. FedLoan, Navient, Nelnet, Great Lakes, there are others. These are the core loan servicers of federal student loans, but today your lender is typically the U.S. Department of Education, actually not typically 100% of the time. If you were going to school prior to July of 2010, which is when the government nationalized student loans, there was a different type of loan that was actually the prevalent. Most student loans were lent as FFEL loans, not direct loans, direct meaning coming from the Department of Education. FFEL loans came from private lenders like Citibank and Sallie Mae, Discover, Wells Fargo. They were your lender and oftentimes also your servicer. If you have FFEL loans, they're still eligible for certain federal benefits that we're going to talk about. But in the very near term, they would need to be consolidated to direct student loans. So we're going to talk about that if you were taking out loans prior to July of 2010, and that applies to you. So we want to understand the difference between direct and FFEL loans because that's important for getting certain federal benefits. Then we also like to mention always fixed versus variable rates. As you take out your federal student loans, and you did through medical school, the interest rates that were on your federal student loans, your Stafford loans and your Grad Plus loans, while they varied over the course of your medical schooling, because interest rates change each year on federal student loans based on rates in the economy, the rates issued to you are always fixed. They're not going to fluctuate over time. And as rates are going up, as you may know in the economy right now, your federal student loan interest rates are not going up. Federal student loans haven't been issued with variable rates in many years. And then accrued versus capitalized interest. Just understand that anytime you have outstanding federal student loan debt and you're not in a payment plan, or your payment plan doesn't cover all of your accruing interest, then sometimes that interest can capitalize. And what capitalize means is that interest starts accruing on your interest. In other words, previously accrued interest gets added to principal, and then capitalized interest is interest on interest. We want to try to avoid that whenever possible, and just understand that the advice that I'm going to give you here in terms of navigating repayment always seeks to have interest not capitalized whenever possible, as that's worse than interest merely accruing. And then big difference here between refinancing and consolidation, but I see these misused all the time by all parties involved in student loans. Refinancing is what the SoFi and Credibles and Laurel Road and companies like that do. They're private lenders that offer you lower interest rates, hopefully, on your federal student loans. Understand that when you refinance a federal student loan, you are giving up the federal benefits that I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about here. So refinancing is taking federal loans away from the federal government and going into a private loan that has its own unique terms and conditions and promissory note and payment and rate that you've negotiated. You no longer have federal benefits available to you. Consolidation, on the other hand, is when you take a group of federal student loans and you consolidate them down to one or more individual federal student loans. So they maintain their federal eligibility. A good example of what a consolidation might be appropriate for a borrower who, say, has FFEL loans and needs to make them direct for public service loan forgiveness, which we'll talk about, is that they would merge the FFEL loans into the existing direct loans, or simply consolidate the single FEL loan into a single direct consolidation loan. In this case, the interest rates stay the same and the status is still federal. So sometimes consolidation is desired or needed to position loans for federal benefits, and those federal benefits always are maintained. And then I'm going to assume that you guys have at least heard by name the income-driven repayment plans. Most important thing to understand about an income-driven repayment plan, well, there are a few important things to understand about them. The biggest one is that in income-driven repayment, your payments are based on your income. They're not based on how much debt you have. So doctors uniquely can get really low payments during your training, that period of modest income during residency and fellowship, by applying for or being in an income-driven repayment plan. Whereas if we know the average doctor has $250,000 of student loan debt, and that would cost close to $3,000 a month in some cases on average to pay back over on a monthly basis over 10 years, being able to pay as little as zero up to maybe $200 or $300 a month in training is a significant relief, and also can drive savings for you. So we often talk about the income-driven repayment plans as appropriate for early career physicians. In terms of loan types here, because the government nationalized student loans 12 years ago, a little over 12 years ago, and your Stafford loans and your Grad Plus loans come from the Department of Education or direct loans, your loan types today are relatively simple to understand. Those of you that maybe were in some sort of undergraduate or other graduate program prior to July of 2010 and have FFEL loans, hopefully somebody's gotten to you before this discussion to tell you they can be consolidated into direct loans and get more benefit. Parent borrowers uniquely can take out Parent Plus loans for their children to go to school. Those aren't going to be contemplated in the benefits we're talking about if somehow that applies to you or someone you know. And then Perkins loans, they were available up through 2017. They uniquely carry 5% interest rates, and were available for a lot of undergrad programs and maybe some other programs as well. Standalone, a Perkins loan isn't eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which we'll talk about, but it too can be consolidated into a direct loan and made eligible. So we want to talk about Perkins loans when we talk about federal benefits as well. And then private loans that you have, whether you've taken your federal student loans and already refinanced them to a private lender, hopefully you got lower interest rates and are comfortable with that payment. Probably don't need to be in this discussion or this webinar if that's the case. We're really going to talk about navigating the federal loan repayment and forgiveness and cancellation environment here. But private loans can be from private institutions, banks, credit unions, etc. In terms of repayment plans, again, the majority of physicians today are or should be using income-driven repayment plans early in their career as they approach their transition to practice, and often even into once they transition to practice, specifically if they're pursuing a federal loan forgiveness opportunity like PSLF, which I'll refer to that moving forward, which is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I always advise individual borrowers, particularly those with higher debt levels like medical graduates, that when you're in forbearance, I call that the F word. When you're in forbearance and you have $200,000 of student loan debt at 6% interest rates, you're talking about $12,000 of interest that accrues every year. In forbearance, there's no forgiveness opportunity for that, and the interest can capitalize every year. The only good forbearance, typically, I would refer to is what's happening in the CARES Act right now. Some of you may have graduated from medical school and not had a payment on your federal student loans since you started training, and you're now in a couple of years, maybe into training, have not had to choose a repayment plan, because the CARES Act has halted both accruing interest and required payments on federal student loans. That ends in January, but the non-payment that was allowed during the CARES Act also has zero accruing interest. So that would be the one good forbearance, is when interest isn't accruing. But come January, that ends, and we like to see individual borrowers positioning for greater savings and stopping the bleeding of accrued interest through the income-driven repayment plans. Now, I've put together a decision tree to really help you guys navigate these income-driven repayment plans. There are 5 available today. The 2 highlighted in red, I don't really even talk about for physicians individually. And unless you were taking out federal student loans on or before October 1st of 2007, I'm going to assume that's not most folks in this group who are more early in their career, graduates or going through training now, or even in school. You're probably going to be choosing between 2 income-driven repayment plans, and that's pay as you earn or revised pay as you earn. So let me explain this decision tree here. Quite simply, if you are early in your career here, you're still in residency, you're still in fellowship, or you've only recently transitioned to practice, and you are single, you're almost always going to use the revised pay-as-you-earn plan. In fact, if you are married and your spousal income is $20,000 or less, it's still generally recommended that you use the revised pay-as-you-earn plan. The reason we suggest this plan is because it uses your household income no matter how you file your taxes. So it's the simplest plan in terms of they're going to base your payments on your household income. And we'll get into what payments look like shortly if you don't already know. If you are single and you're using revised pay-as-you-earn, you have limited spousal income, what happens is if your payments, and they can be as low as zero, some of you may have experienced this while you're in training, your income-driven repayment payments can be as low as zero. And any outstanding interest that's accruing, only half of that is charged to you in revised pay-as-you-earn. It is by far the most generous of the income-driven repayment plans when it comes to stopping the bleeding of accruing interest. So we like that benefit for doctors in training because you get the benefit of reduced accruing and not capitalizing interest. And it's also positioning you for loan forgiveness through public service loan forgiveness. Now, if you're married to someone or you're planning to be married to someone who earns $20,000 or more in income, then it's going to make sense to look at what it would cost you to file your taxes married and separately. Oftentimes that can increase your tax liability. We know that it doesn't ever really make your tax liability lower versus filing married, filing jointly. That is typically the best tax liability outcome for you. But with married filing separately, you are able to isolate your own income and make your income-driven payments based on your individual income, either through the filing separately status of your tax filing, or by using a payroll stub. And so you can keep your payments as low as I'm going to show you in our case study. So married filing separately allows you to lower your payments while relief is either needed because you're in training or because you're trying to maximize a forgiveness opportunity. If you do ultimately decide to file married and separately, you're going to need to either use pay-as-you-earn or income-based repayment because, as we said, revised pay-as-you-earn is always using your household income no matter how you filed your taxes. So hopefully that decision tree is helpful and it's applicable in the majority, in the vast majority of cases. In terms of recent developments here, you've seen likely that the Biden administration announced loan cancellation for all federal borrowers who have individual adjusted gross incomes of less than $125,000. So most of you doctors in training or students would qualify for this. And then in your household, if your income is less than $250,000, they use adjusted gross income for that. Loan cancellation is available $10,000 for all borrowers. It can be $20,000 if you took out a Pell Grant. Really easy to go look and see if you took out a Pell Grant. You can go to studentaid.gov where this application also lives, and it will take you 2 minutes to fill out. You don't need to upload any additional information. We encourage that everyone go through that application as soon as you can. It should be available till the end of the year. But in studentaid.gov under My Aid summary, you can also see there's two tabs. On the left, it shows your loans. On the right, it shows grants. And if you had a Pell Grant, even one single Pell Grant or 4 years worth of Pell Grants, you're going to be eligible for $20,000 of loan cancellation. Those who are already using income-driven repayment plans might see automatic cancellation very recently. So recently, in fact, that I haven't even updated this PowerPoint presentation, but actually on Friday, one of the courts was able to step in and create a snag with respect to the to broad loan cancellation. So that's up in the air right now, but the Biden administration seems committed to delivering on it and is referring to this as just a bump in the road. And we're going to have to keep you posted on what exactly will happen. We're kind of in uncharted territory with how this might work out, but the application remains available. And as soon as they get past any bumps in the road. They expect to start forgiving loans as soon as early in November, or I should say loan cancellation. In terms of loan cancellation, it's not federally taxable. There's a handful of states that might tax it at their state tax levels. That's to be really determined on a state basis. The PSLF limited waiver is typically applicable to individual borrowers who had made the wrong kind of repayment plan or made the wrong kind of repayment in public service loan forgiveness or had the wrong kind of loans. They didn't have direct loans. Nonetheless, I'll explain that in another slide because it's very generous for individuals for whom qualify for it. Most recent medical grads, say over the past almost 10 years now, you've got direct federal student loans. And if you got the right advice coming out of medical school, you were steered towards at least one of the income-driven repayment plans and you were making the right kinds of payments for PSLF. So the waiver wouldn't apply to you unless you were taking out federal student loans prior to 2010 or for some reason not using an income-driven repayment plan. As we mentioned, all borrowers have to go into repayment on January 1st of next year. There's also been suggested with the loan cancellation announcement also came the announcement that a new income-driven repayment plan was going to be available come July 1st of next year. That could charge as little as 5% of your discretionary income. Right now, the cheapest income-driven repayment plan charges 10% of your discretionary income, and that's pay as you earn and revised pay as you earn. So having your payments be half of that would certainly be beneficial and drive more loan forgiveness and be more affordable. However, I believe the reference here, and none of this is cemented until obviously the legislation is actually passed and the program comes out, but the 5% is going to apply to undergrad borrowers. And so if the majority of your borrowing is from graduate level student debt, it's likely that your payments are still going to be in the 10% realm, but more information on that as it comes available. And then there have been servicer changes over the years. Anyone pursuing public service loan forgiveness is going to see that their servicer, if it hasn't already changed from Fed Loan to MOHELA, that will happen before the end of the year. There are 1.3 million people working towards public service loan forgiveness. I mean, there's 35 million jobs in the US that qualify. So this number should probably be remarkably larger. But nonetheless, MOHELA is going to be the servicer for all of the borrowers pursuing PSLF. If you haven't already heard of this program, we'll just take a step back here and explain its core requirements. It was created by Congress in 2007 to encourage people to work in public service. How to qualify for it is have qualifying loans while being in a qualifying repayment plan and working full-time for a qualifying employer. For number one, they need to be direct federal student loans, and you can take those Stafford loans and those Perkins loans and consolidate them to a direct loan to make them eligible. A qualifying repayment plan is going to be an income-driven repayment plan moving forward. The only other qualifying plan would be a 10-year standard repayment plan, and certainly if you were in one of those, you wouldn't have anything left to forgive after 10 years because PSLF is a 10-year cumulative requirement. You must work full-time for a qualifying employer cumulatively. It doesn't need to be the same employer. Think 3 years in a pediatrics residency and then 3 years in a pediatrics fellowship and then 4 years with as an attending or working transitioning to a nonprofit or public service qualified organization. That would be your 10 total years, 3 different employers. It could be 10 different employers. You want to pursue this cumulatively, and how they define full-time is an average of 30 hours per week for at least 8 months in a given year. So direct loans, income-driven repayment plan, working full-time for a qualifying employer, 10 cumulative years. Most physicians with federal student loan debt are going to have this available to you. The key is to make sure you're using an income-driven repayment plan during your residency and fellowship. Payments should be as low as 0 in your first year. The reason that's achievable is because you're going to use your last year's tax return to set your payments for the next 12 months. So fourth year med students likely or probably weren't working. If you were, that's very impressive. And then if your income is limited, or I think it's less than around $20,000 a year, your payment in an income-driven repayment plan is zero anyway. So most interns have as low as zero payments in an income-driven repayment plan. And then those payments is your roughly $60,000 salary and training features in your tax return from the previous year. Your payments can be somewhere around $250 to $300 per month. And so in terms of an illustrative case study here, if we had student debt of $280,000 and a current salary in training of $60,000, you're transitioning to practice next year in 2023, and you've made already 36 months of qualifying payments. And yes, the CARES Act non-payment forbearance, where no interest is accruing, does count towards public service loan forgiveness for those of you that are in residency or fellowship with a 501c3 or federal, state, or local government or agency like a VA or other federal or state agency or government. But 501c3 hospitals, 95% of them in the United States are 501, 95% of teaching hospitals are 501c3. So most residents and fellows do qualify for PSLF during your training. And you can imagine if you're making $300 or less payments for upwards of 6 years or more, that when you're done 10 years, making income-driven repayment plan payments the whole way, there's substantial loan forgiveness available here. In this case, the savings out of pocket is in excess of $200,000. And that makes working in a nonprofit environment when you transition to practice probably worth effectively an additional salary boost in each year on average of about $50,000 a year. So this is good information to have when you're negotiating with potential employers as you approach your transition to practice. Maybe you can lever a for-profit provider or a for-profit organization by stating that you have public service loan forgiveness available to the tune of $200,000 and would like to get some upfront or student loan contributions since you won't have PSLF if you take a for-profit job. We want to make sure we're representing you to maximize this opportunity here. You may have seen in recent years that PSLF had gone through some challenges. This mostly applies, as I mentioned before, to individuals who had FFEL loans. The majority of loans lent before July of 2010 were FFEL loans, and servicers weren't being very diligent, or even they were being self-interested. There, the conflicts of interest existed there to rush borrowers off the phone, not tell them about public service loan forgiveness or the income-driven plans. And if they were to consolidate their loans to direct loans, servicers would lose business. So not so coincidentally, they weren't mentioning that to borrowers. And that's all really been fixed through this PSLF limited waiver that was announced last October. It actually expires on Monday of next week. But just today, changes to the public service loan forgiveness program cemented a lot of this stuff. Suffice it to say for you guys, if you're in school now, finishing up school, or you're moving on through your training now and planning to transition to practice, or just recently transitioned to practice, following the 3 core PSLF requirements is all you need to do at this point. But if you had older federal student loans, or you graduated from medical school, say 8, 10 or more years ago, the public service loan forgiveness limited waiver would count long forbearances and any repayment plan on any direct or FFEL or Perkins loan towards PSLF, because previously people were getting denied. And now those denials are now acceptances. And this is true through this PSLF limited waiver. So if you do have FFEL loans, or if you've worked for a PSLF eligible employer and were in a repayment status or long-term forbearance, in other words, not in an income-driven repayment plan, the government is saying they recognize that servicers were failing you and will count that time as qualified time towards PSLF. But if you've only recently moved from medical school into training and are planning to transition to practice, you've you've been in the CARES Act window, which also you haven't made payments, and it also still qualifies for PSLF. The employment certification part of PSLF is done through the PSLF help tool. It means that your employer is involved in this by certifying that you've worked full-time for them for certain periods of time. We suggest doing this annually, unless the employer has a proactive annual outreach to student loan borrowers driving this. It's the borrower's responsibility to go to studentaid.gov, the PSLF help tool linked here, pre-populate a form that says, I worked in this, say we're talking about your training, July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2023. That's 12 months of employment that qualifies for PSLF. You complete that form, sign it, bring it to the authorized representative at your hospital. It's your GME, typically, or residency coordinator, are the most common signers of this form. Then once they sign it, certify that you worked full-time, you send it into Mohila, who is the loan servicer, and they'll eventually count your 12 qualified payments towards PSLF. You want to be doing this annually, and it is your responsibility at the end of the day as the borrower. Some employers are getting more involved in this. We at Elevator trying to drive that as well, so that employers are using this as a recruiting and retention tool. But it's always the borrower's responsibility to make sure that you're counting time towards PSLF. The Department of Education or the loan servicers are not going to go back and look at your payment history to count qualified payments towards PSLF unless you've alerted them that you've worked in a qualifying environment full-time and both your employer and you have signed off on that form. Then they'll go back and count qualified payments. So you really want to do this annually, so then when 10 years is done, forgiveness can happen quickly. We've seen it happen in as fast as 8 days from when the 120 payment requirement is complete. PSLF now is growing rapidly. There's 14 billion already been forgiven for almost 250,000 borrowers. There's 132 billion in this pipeline right now, meaning folks like you who may have completed a PSLF form already and have a year or 2 years or 3 years done of the 10 required. That's about 1.2 to 1.3 million people in the US today. I still think that numbers should probably be 2 to 3 times higher than what it is. Also understand, if you're pursuing loan repayment opportunities like National Health Service Corps or a state program in California, they have Stephen M. Thompson, which is a loan repayment program. If you work in an underserved area, you can get meaningful loan repayment from either National Health Service Corps or a state program. Some employers are starting to offer contribution platforms as well. And if they're using the IRS allowance from Section 127, that can be tax-free to you for up to $5,500 a year. Some employers are also employing an LRAP, loan repayment assistance program, where none of it's taxable to you. And then others have taxable bonuses that they'll pay you upfront, $20,000 a year over 5 years. Understand that all of these things can work in conjunction with public service loan forgiveness if you're also working in a 501c3 environment. So you do want to be strategic about how you allocate these monies, and we can help you with that, as well as we can help the employers align this. In terms of evolving legislation, if you are already in an income-driven repayment plan, you might be wondering, hey, I'm supposed to recertify my income every year so that we set the payments for the next 12 months. Well, while there's been no payments for over 2.5 years, there hasn't been a requirement to recertify. We don't expect any borrower to be asked to recertify until at least July of next year. And so unless you've experienced a loss in income over this year from past years, for whatever reason, just wait for your servicer to ask you to recertify your income. Use older tax returns to set your payments for the next 12 months. If you've recently transitioned or about to transition, you can have a year of $250 or $300 monthly payments while you have a transitioned income, and that can really drive savings for you. So unless you've experienced a loss in income or you stopped working for some reason, go ahead and let your IDR, your income-driven repayment plans, payments pick up in January where they left off on older tax information. That'll get you lower payments. And then in terms of certifying public service loan forgiveness, use that PSLF help tool. It pre-populates the form for you, so it just limits user error. We've seen these forms sometimes have missing information, they get denied, and we want to try to do this as seamlessly as possible. We also now have an ability to digitally sign these, which is helpful as well, because currently the Department of Education's tool requires that you print, sign, scan, send, print, sign, scan, send. And hopefully they'll digitize that now, but we have a way to do that for you in the interim. And then we're talking about refinancing. When you refinance your federal student loans to private rates or private loans, you're giving up federal benefits. So if you have up to $20,000 of loan cancellation coming, if you moved that over to a private lender, you would not have the loan cancellation available to you. The same goes with public service loan forgiveness. So really, it's only when you are not going to be eligible for federal benefit, your income's too high, or you're working in a for-profit environment, or your household income is so high that PSLF doesn't apply to you. And in that case, it may make sense to refinance your loans. The average borrower today, and particularly with rates rising now, this next year of medical school is going to have higher interest rates associated with it. The private marketplace can offer you lower interest rates, particularly for shorter terms, if you're able to pay your loans back in 5, 7, or 10 years. But you only want to entertain the refinancing marketplace when you're not eligible for federal benefits or not interested in pursuing them. And that's typically working in a for-profit environment or having too high of a debt to income ratio or too high of an income or salary. Help is on the way for all of you who need it. Doctors Without Quarters continues to provide detailed individual student loan consultations, and through Practice Match, you get 15% off of the individual fee-based consultations. We now have a PSLF salary analysis calculator that's available for free. Refinancing options are also available. We work with all of the lenders and work to leverage the lenders to get you the lowest rate possible. Our analysis always includes outcomes for tax planning, for example, filing separately versus jointly, the student loan implications of that you can share with your tax advisor, and being able to digitally do the PSLF forms. So some newer resources available to you here as well. Peyton, I will send you a follow-up email that has links to each of these resources and opportunities. And with that, that is the information that I have here for you guys. How'd I do on time? It's 41 minutes after. Not too bad. We can open it up to questions, or if you want to keep the recording going or stop it so that you have a clean recording, go for that. And thank you guys for listening to a student loan talk during a career fair. I think all of this kind of works together in terms of opportunity, and I wish you all the best in your careers.
So if anyone else has any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. Jason, did you see the two that were in there? Okay. There is two in there. Kathleen wants to know, what if you worked full-time with a qualifying employer prior to taking out loans? Can you ever apply those years?
You cannot. If you had undergrad loans and then worked in an environment like before you went to med school, before you went to a master's program, then yes, the undergrad loans, you could count time towards PSLF for that. But if you're talking about all the loans being taken out after you worked in a qualifying environment, then no, that those three requirements do need to be coexist.
And then Catherine wants to know if she wants to go for prepay to pay, would that affect the PSLF?
Yes. Yeah. Both of those plans. Oh, in other words, I guess the question here is, what if I changed my repayment plan?
Yeah.
We often advise borrowers to do that as they progress through their career. Like, let's say You started residency single, you finished residency married, and you both have an income. It may make sense to start filing your taxes separately in year 3 or 4, and then switch from revised pay as you earn to pay as you earn. So if you do that, you're allowed to switch income-driven repayment plans, and it does not reset the clock towards the 10 years required. It's expected that if you're navigating this properly, you may need to change the repayment plan a few times. It may be appropriate for a lot of you to go into this new July 2023 plan when that comes available. And if you already had 5 years done towards PSLF, you wouldn't be giving that up if you switched plans. I see the question here about applying for PSLF. That can be done also at the PSLF help tool. That help tool is going to pre-populate a form that says, I'm certifying employment, or I'm done my 120 months, forgive my loans. And you check one of those boxes. So it's there. Is consolidation required if there's FFEL loans and federal loans for PSLF? Those FFEL loans need to be consolidated to be eligible for PSLF. The direct loans are already eligible. There's a consolidation tutorial that I've put together. It's about 5 minutes long that shows how that works. You can email me at Benelevate if you want to get a copy of that.
Okay. I think that's all the questions so far. If anyone has anything else they would like to add, can do so. Like Jason did mention, he's going to be emailing me some links. So I'm going to email those to you guys afterwards, probably sometime tomorrow, once I get that email put together. And if you guys liked this webinar tonight, we actually have another one coming up tomorrow night. It is transitioning into practice with Melissa Shepard. She is a physician. So I will put that link in the email as well after I send that out tomorrow. So if anybody else doesn't have any questions, I guess we can go ahead and wrap this up. And if something pops up later, feel free to email me back tomorrow and I can pass this along to Jason. All right. Well, thank you for your time tonight, Jason.
My pleasure. Thank you, Peyton. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you, everyone.
Yep.